Welcome to Money in Tech. Today we're here with Sina Khanifar, entrepreneur and digital rights activist. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
So Sina, tell me, February 11th, what happened?
So February 11th was the day we fight back against mass surveillance. It was kind of a big online protest with thousands of websites participating and basically protesting everything that we found out since June when the first Snowden leaks came to light.
So is this any connection to PIPA and SOPA?
You know, it was kind of a protest in the spirit of those protests. So we actually launched the campaign on the second anniversary of SOPA, PIPA, and on of Aaron Swartz's passing. And it was really, sort of a call for action, asking people to sort of speak up and for the internet to speak up and say that privacy is important, particularly at this sort of a critical moment when we're learning so much about what the government's doing. To say that privacy is really important and that we won't stand for having our privacy taken away from us.
Cool. So what were you asking people to do? Was this a blackout similar to?
So we didn't. So rather than going for a full blackout, I think a blackout is something that will happen at some months in the future, probably sometime in the next year when bills are actually up for a vote. But unlike with SOPA PIPA when we are simply defeating a bill, with privacy and surveillance, we're trying to pass a bill, which is quite a bit more difficult. And so in order to do that, there has to be a series of actions that build up to a larger moment. So rather than asking people to black out their websites, we ask them to add a banner, asking their users to call their representatives and email their representatives and sort of help make room in Congress for legislators who are pro-privacy to pass bills that would sort of help end surveillance.
So what kind of response did you see? I mean, how many people were following this and what did they accomplish?
So we had about 8,000 websites sign up.
Oh, wow.
8 million would be amazing, but 8,000 websites sign up to take part in it, all the way from Reddit and 4chan down the line to much smaller sites, Tumblr, Imgur, just a whole bunch of different tech companies and individuals. On the day of action, we had, I think, something like 13 million people who viewed the banner around the world. And we ended up generating about 80,000 calls to Congress. And to give you some sense of that, on average in a week, Congress gets about 30,000 calls. So for them to get 80,000 in just one day means that they've got really, really busy phone lines.
Wow, pretty impressive. So what's next? Where do we go from here?
So, obviously this is a long fight and it's not one that ends overnight. But right now our goal is to get this one piece of legislation that's the most promising piece of legislation out there. It's called the USA Freedom Act, passed through Congress. And for that to happen, there needs to be, legislators need to move, they need to debate and figure out exactly what form of the bill that needs to pass. But also, people need to speak up to their representatives and keep pushing for this to happen. So, right after the Snowden revelations, the first sort of big activist action was the Stop Watching Us coalition, which was led by Mozilla and a bunch of others. And since then, there's been a series of follow-on actions. There was a big protest in DC, defund the NSA, which was a campaign to remove funding for some of the NSA surveillance programs. The Day We Fight Back was another. I expect in the next sort of 6 months, there'll be 2 or 3 more similar to that, moments where we push people to take action to make room in Congress for new bills.
Yeah, so Sina, do you think this will actually accomplish anything? Because I would be concerned that, even if we get these new regulations, the NSA and CIA and whatnot would still just find a way to tap everybody.
What we have in place right now is basically amounts to to a legal and technical infrastructure for a police state. If down the line we have a government who comes into power that is looking to abuse the powers that they have, it's very, very easy to do that. And so if we want to remove that power from the government, if we want to empower citizens relative to their government, what we have to do is to attack both pieces of that, both the technical side of it and the legislative side of it, to make it much, much more difficult. And so this sort of legislative effort goes hand in hand with efforts to improve encryption techniques that are used by communications providers. And we've got, the activists will be working on both sides of that, pushing companies like Google and Twitter to use perfect forward secrecy or whatever else it might be to improve sort of the connections and make the NSA's job more difficult.
So I understand the need for privacy, but aren't we putting ourselves at some considerable risk for terrorist attacks and other activities?
So the president's own review board reviewed this and looked at, of all these new things that the NSA is doing, looking at the metadata of emails, of phone records, has it really prevented any terrorist attacks? And the president's own review board, which was selected, like handpicked by former administration officials and basically no one who would really go far in criticizing the NSA, so that there wasn't any proof that they'd prevented any terrorism over the last decade. The idea that we need to compromise these, our privacy and our civil liberties to guarantee us more security is just a false choice.
Okay, so if anybody wanted to help or get involved, where should they go now?
So the best place is to really reach out to one of the organizations like EFF or Demand Progress, who've been doing this work for years upon years. Supporting EFF and Demand Progress is probably one of the best things that you can do. EFF has an ongoing lawsuit against the NSA. So, they take both approaches, both the sort of legal constitutional approach and the activist sort of advocate approach. And as nonprofits, they can use all the help they can get.
Cool, man. Well, thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming on the show today.
Cheers. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Awesome.
For more information on the day we fight back, check out the show notes at moneyandtech.com.